At 8 in the morning on April 12, 1981, 15-year-old Sheila Sharp was skipping home. She'd spent the night at her next-door neighbor's house and was eager to get back to her mother and 4 siblings, as well as 2 family friends who were staying over. But as she approached her house, it was eerily silent. Where were her family members and friends? Were they still asleep? Sheila would soon receive the horrifying answer. As she entered the living room, she discovered the bodies of her mother, Susan, her brother John, and her friend Dana Wingate. All of them had been tied up with medical tape and electrical cords, and her sister Tina was missing. In shock, Sheila frantically searched for her 3 brothers and found them physically unharmed in an adjacent bedroom along with their other family friend, Justin Smart. They weren't even aware of the attack and had no clue who did it. The subsequent investigation also turned up a mess of confusing leads. So who could have committed this horrifying crime? And what else did the police uncover? The truth is chilling. The Sharp family didn't seem to have any enemies and lived a mundane life in California before the shocking crime. Their story began in July 1979. Glenna Susan Sue Sharp, along with her 5 children, left her home in Connecticut after separating from her husband, James Sharp. The family then moved to Northern California, where Sue's brother Don lived. Upon arriving in California, she rented a small trailer formerly occupied by her brother at the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy. The following fall, she moved to House Hash 28 in the rural Sierra Nevada railroad town of Keddie. The house was much larger than the trailer and had become available when Plumas County's Sheriff Sylvester Douglas Thomas vacated the property. On the evening of April 11th, Sheila decided to spend the night with her neighbors, the Seabolt family, who lived in the house next door, House Hash 27. Sue agreed to let her sleep over while Sue remained at home with Rick Gregg and her son's young friend Justin Smart. Sheila left Hash 28 shortly after 8 p.m. to sleep at the Seabolts. Tina, who was already at the Seabolt residence watching television, returned to Hash 28 shortly after her sister arrived at Hash 27. The time was 9:30 p.m. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but the next morning Sheila arrived home to a horrifying sight. Most of her family was dead and her sister Tina had disappeared. Upon discovering the scene, Sheila rushed back to the Seabolts' house. When Jamie Seabolt, father of the Seabolt family, heard what had happened, he went over to help. They were able to get Rick, Greg, and Justin out through the bedroom window. He later admitted that he briefly entered the home through the back door to see if anyone was still alive, potentially contaminating evidence in the process. But fortunately, it did not significantly hamper the investigation. According to police reports, the deaths of Sue, John, and Dana were especially brutal. Most of the details of their injuries are too gruesome to be repeated here. But what's certain is that they were tied up and gagged using articles of clothing before dying painfully through various means. 2 bloodied knives and 1 hammer were found at the scene. One of the knives, a steak knife later determined to be a weapon used in the crime, had been bent at roughly 30 degrees. Blood spatter evidence from inside the house indicated that the crime had taken place entirely in the living room. The strange thing is, Sheila and the Seabolt family claimed they heard no commotion during the night. The crime was committed right under their noses, while they slept soundly. But another family living nearby heard something. A couple in House Hash 16 was awakened at 1:15 a.m. on April 12th by what sounded like muffled screaming. Unfortunately, they were too far away to catch sight of the crime scene itself. Further police investigation revealed that Tina's jacket, shoes, and a toolbox containing various tools were missing from the house, which showed no indication of forced entry. The culprit had also closed the house curtains before taking the telephone off the hook and cutting the cord from the outlet. In addition to interviewing the family of Justin Smart, who lived nearby, detectives interviewed numerous other locals and neighbors. Several recalled seeing a green van parked at the Sharps' house at around 9 p.m. In particular, Justin Smart provided a lot of information. Most of it was contradictory, however. At first, he stated that he had dreamed details of the crime, although he later claimed to have witnessed them. Justin was later hypnotized and made to tell his account of the events once again. In his statement, he claimed he was asleep in the bedroom with Rick and Greg when sounds from the living room woke him. Investigating these sounds, he saw Sue with 2 men, one with a mustache and short hair, the other clean-shaven with long hair. Both wore glasses. According to Justin, John and Dana then entered the home and began arguing with the men. A fight ensued, after which Tina entered the room and was taken out of the cabin's back door by one of the men. Based on Justin's descriptions, composite sketches of the 2 unknown men were produced. In press releases accompanying the sketches, the The suspects were described as in their late 20s to early 30s. One stood between 5 feet 11 inches, 1.80 m, to 6 feet 2 inches, 1.88 m, tall with dark blonde hair, and the other between 5 feet 6 inches, 1.68 m, and 5 feet 10 inches, 1.78 m, with black, greased hair. Both wore gold-framed sunglasses. But it wasn't a trained police artist that did the sketches. Instead, they were made by Harlan Embry, a man with no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching. Why? It was never explained. The police had access to top forensic artists from the Justice Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. But they chose to use an amateur who sometimes volunteered to help local police. Allegedly, a lot of potential evidence was collected at the scene, but because this was pre-DNA testing, very little helpful information was found at this time. When Plumas County Sheriff Doug Thomas called the Sacramento Department of Justice, the agents assigned were also unusual. Instead of the homicide unit, which deals with crimes such as this, the department sent in 2 special agents from their organized crime unit. And who were these 2 men? Nobody knew for sure. About 4,000 man-hours were spent working the case, which Thomas described as frustrating. Rumors that the crimes were ritualistic or motivated by drug trafficking were dismissed by Thomas. He stated in the week following the crime that neither drug paraphernalia nor illegal drugs were found in the home. As for the missing Tina Sharp, her disappearance was initially investigated by the FBI as a possible abduction. But on April 29, 1981, it was reported that the FBI had backed off from their search. They claimed that the California State Department of Justice was doing an adequate job and made the FBI's presence unnecessary. A grid-pattern search of the area covering a 5-mile, 8.0 kilometers radius around the house was conducted with police dogs, but the efforts were fruitless. 3 years later, on April 22, 1984, a bottle collector discovered the cranium of a human skull and part of a mandible at Camp 18, near Feather Falls in neighboring Butte County. This was roughly 100 miles, 160 kilometers, from Keddie. The remains were sent for study. In June of that year, a forensic pathologist confirmed that these remains belonged to Tina. Near the remains, detectives also discovered a blue nylon jacket, a blanket, a pair of Levi Strauss jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty medical tape dispenser. Shortly after announcing the discovery, the Butte County Sheriff's Office received an anonymous call. The caller identified the remains as belonging to Tina, but the call was not documented. In 2013, a tape containing a recording of the call was rediscovered at the bottom of an evidence box. It's unclear why the police chose not to investigate the caller's identity further. Perhaps this could have been a potential lead. Speaking of leads, throughout the investigation, one of the main suspects was Martin Smart, Justin Smart's father and a neighbor of the Sharp family. During the initial investigation, Martin claimed that a claw hammer had gone missing from his home. He also seemed eager to assist with the case, providing a lot of possible clues. Plumas County Sheriff Sylvester Thomas later stated that Martin had provided endless clues in the case that seemed to throw the suspicion away from him. In a 2008 documentary on the case, Martin's wife, Marilyn Smart, claimed that she suspected her husband and his friend, John Beau Boubede, were responsible. According to Marilyn, on the evening of April 11, 1981, she had left Martin and Boubede at a local bar around 11 p.m. and returned home to sleep. She stated that she had awoken at approximately 2 a.m. on April 12th to find the 2 men burning an unknown item in the wood stove. Additionally, she alleged that Martin hated Johnny Sharp with a passion. However, in that same documentary, Sheriff Doug Thomas said that he had interviewed Martin, who passed a lie detector test. It's fair to say the investigation was sloppily conducted. Sheriff Thomas had resigned from the investigation 3 months in, taking a job instead at the Sacramento DOJ. His handling of the case in retrospect would be considered disastrous at best and corrupt at worst. I was told the suspects were told to get out of town, so to me, that means it was covered up. Sheila Sharp told CBS Sacramento in 2016. According to a 2016 article published by the Sacramento Bee, Martin had left Keddie and driven to Reno, Nevada shortly after the crime occurred. While there, he sent a letter to Marilyn ruminating on personal struggles in their marriage. He concluded by stating, "I've paid the price of your love and amp. Now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg later admitted that the letter had been overlooked in the initial investigation. It was never admitted as evidence. He criticized the quality of the initial investigation, saying that even a newbie officer straight out of the academy could have done a better job. According to him, 6 potential suspects were being examined, but Martin Smart was the most suspicious of them all. A counselor whom Martin regularly visited also alleged that he took responsibility for the deaths of Sue and Tina. But the counselor also claimed that he said, "I didn't have anything to do with the boys." He allegedly told the counselor that Tina was eliminated to prevent her from identifying him, as she had witnessed the whole thing. Unfortunately, even if the police wanted to bring him and John Boubeid in for further investigation, they couldn't. Boubeid, who allegedly had ties to organized crime in Chicago, died there in 1988. As for Martin Smart, he died of cancer in June 2000. In 2014, the house in which the crime occurred was demolished. Still, the investigation went on. On March 24, 2016, a hammer matching the description of the one Martin had lost was discovered in a local pond. It was then taken in as evidence. The Plumas County Sheriff stated, "The location it was found. It would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced." In April 2018, Gamberg stated that DNA evidence recovered from a piece of tape at the crime scene matched that of a known living suspect. The identity of this suspect was not disclosed to the public, unfortunately. While some allege that the police were merely lazy and apathetic, others believe it was a conspiracy. The most widely accepted theory involves a love triangle between Martin Smart, Marilyn Smart, and Susan Sharp. It was believed that Martin and Sue were having an affair. Susan was also supposedly counseling Marilyn to leave her husband, who she had said was abusive to her. When Martin discovered this, he enlisted Bo, his friend and known mob enforcer, to get rid of Susan. This would account for Marilyn leaving her husband on the day of the discovery. It would also explain why the Smart boy and the other Sharp boys in the adjoining room were spared. Additionally, it gives context to Martin's handwritten note that Marilyn gave to the Plumas sheriff's deputy. Some investigators who picked up the case when it reopened in 2013 tie the slayings into an even larger plot. To Gamberg, it is clear that the DOJ and Thomas Run Sheriff's Department covered it up, is the way it sounds. He alleges that Bo and Martin fit into a larger drug smuggling scheme that involved the federal government. As of 2023, 42 years later, this brutal crime which destroyed nearly an entire family still poses more questions than answers. Till today, serious efforts have been made to convict any suspects. Still, with the wealth of clues, you'd think the police would be more diligent in investigating. So why aren't they doing so? Maybe hidden hands are pulling the strings, or maybe it's just plain old apathy after such a long period. Nobody knows for sure. Hopefully more new developments will occur so the families of the victims can receive some closure.